Welcome back to the Quantum Yoga Podcast. This is QYP 12, and we've got Mikey Siegel on the line here for what I think will be a fascinating conversation into an exploration into consciousness. So thanks, Mikey, for taking your time to speak with the listeners.
It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, there may be some folks that don't know about your work and what you've been up to. Can you just give us a synopsis of how you got into the work that you're doing and what you're up to?
Big picture, everything that I'm doing in some way or another revolves around the effort to increase human well-being, raise human consciousness, uplift humanity, and to do so using new and innovative approaches. So if I were to summarize my interest, it's something like spiritual innovation. It's how do we create new techniques, new tools, new approaches to supporting human flourishing and human awakening that are adapted to our modern context, particularly with an eye for modern technology. And so how did I get here? Where did this sort of unique fusion come from? Actually, my interest started on the technology side. So I've for a long time been interested in engineering and building stuff, taking stuff apart, how things work, and so I actually ended up studying computer engineering in school, and ended up going from there and studying robotics in graduate school. This whole time building and cultivating this deep interest in how things work, how the world works, how to build things, and that interest has been strong and remains strong. But when I was finishing graduate school, I was coming to a really sharp realization, and that was that I had this deep understanding from a mechanical perspective, how the world works, but somehow with that deep understanding, in a way, I still felt like crap. I still felt in some ways disconnected, unfulfilled. I felt anxious. I felt like life was missing something. And I had to kind of come to terms with the fact that I really didn't understand how to be happy. And so I began that deep exploration of what it means to be fulfilled and happy as a human being. And that took me into exploring meditation and consciousness. Went on meditation retreats, explored psychedelics, explored all kinds of approaches to this. And what I realized was that understanding the inner world is just as important as understanding the outer world. And so I was holding these two polarities, recognizing this deep importance of understanding ourselves and our relationship to ourselves, and how much that determines our reality, how much that determines our experience as a human, and also understanding the way the world works in this outer world and this whole approach to engineering and technology. And the two didn't really seem to go together. But over time, what I started to realize was that I really loved engineering. I really loved thinking about technology. And also the only problem that I felt was worth solving, the only thing I really wanted to put my attention on, was really getting at the roots of human suffering and trying to solve the global crises we face as a humanity from the inside out, by shifting the human experience, by increasing the sense of human connection and compassion and love. And so that's when I started thinking how these things could actually become one. And it actually started to become really obvious to me that there was no reason why we couldn't have the intention to build and design modern technologies to accomplish the same thing that ancient approaches to meditation and concentration and shamanic experience, that we couldn't design modern technologies with the exact same goals. And that's been my focus ever since. Not to say that that's easy to do, but in my mind, it's 100% possible, and it's actually, for me, one of the greatest uses of modern technology that I can imagine.
Yeah, that's quite a noble pursuit and a really worthy one. I imagine that when you were trying to connect these dots and to see where they may have already connected, that was probably somewhere to do with neuroscience and brain mapping and looking at the brain as this interface of what's already been studied. Is that true?
Yeah, that was definitely one of my first starting points, and I spent quite a while focusing on that. Actually, at one point, I moved to Hong Kong, and I was working with a couple researchers named Gino Yu and Jeffrey Martin, and we were really intensely looking at what were the best guesses and sort of experimentally proven theories around what parts of the brain were correlated to these deep states of meditation and particularly these experiences of awakening. And we were thinking about and even beginning the early stages of designing really advanced forms of neurofeedback, where you would essentially measure these parts of the brain using sophisticated technologies, and then sort of as a form of self-reflection, allow people to actually in real time hear and see what was happening in that part of the brain so that they could actually learn to change it, and gain a sort of a sense of agency over it more quickly. And it's a really, really interesting direction, and it's something that still interests me. But I noticed that over time, I've also become a lot more interested in the body and how this shows up in the body, and how you can use the body in addition to the brain as an instrument for self-awareness, and how it can be harnessed by technology as a tool for self-reflection.
Now I'm intrigued. So can you talk more about that?
Yeah. So yeah, I'll just give you an example of a project that I worked on a while back that I think kind of illustrates this. So I've been really interested in the human connection side of this. So not just in how do you take an individual person and support their deep experience, but how do you actually support a deep, even transpersonal connection between people. And my sense is that we're not isolated here. We're not alone. Perhaps one way of saying that the greatest cause of conflict and suffering on this planet is the false sense that we are actually separate. And we can think of that kind of in the cosmic or unitive sense, but then it also is true and just in a practical sense, right? We all depend on each other. We're social animals. Our relationships, and the depth of our relationships from a positive psychology perspective are one of the biggest determining factors of our happiness. And this is well understood scientifically. And so human connection is really key. And what technology is in part producing is an epidemic in loneliness and social isolation. And so this is a major issue that we're facing as a human culture. And so in trying to explore how technology can actually support really deep and meaningful connection, I've done a few projects. There's a big one I'm working on now, which let's make sure to talk about later on in the interview. But this initial project, I'll paint the picture for it. It's this white dome that two people sit inside of, and they sit inside facing each other, with their backs against these wooden, intricately carved mandalas that are also all white, and kind of white sheets on the ground. It's kind of this very serene space, and each person is connected to two sensors. One sensor that measures their heart, and one sensor that measures their breath. And the idea here is, how do you take each person's internal felt experience and bring it out into the space. So everything surrounding them is a reflection of that present moment somatic aspect of their experience. And so the way it feels is that each person can actually feel the other person's heartbeat vibrating their entire body through a personal subwoofer against their back. And each person can actually see and hear the other person's breath as sound and light in the space. And so, if you were to inhale, what I would hear is the sound of like an ocean wave cresting, like whoosh. And when you exhale, the wave sort of crashes into silence. And when you inhale, there's this halo of light that sort of shines through this chair behind you. And when you exhale, it goes to darkness. And so in this environment, there's no winning, there's no losing, there's no points, there's no like feedback like you're trying to get into this state. It is just a form of mutual self-reflection where I'm feeling and hearing your heart and breath, and we're in a way almost merging where the boundary between us begins to blur. And it also supports respiratory synchronization, which is where our breathing begins to become rhythmically entrained. And this is actually something that happens quite naturally when people are in deep, trusting relationships with each other. And by kind of externally guiding people in that direction and making it easier and more natural for their breath to synchronize, you can actually support potentially, and we need to do more research on this, you could potentially support a deeper sense of connection between the people. So you have people kind of stepping into this dome that don't even know each other. And some people might eye gaze and sit in silence. Some people might talk through the whole thing. But when they come out, they kind of have this sense of like, wow, what's your phone number? I want to be friends with you. Like this kind of the sense that we just went through something really profound together.
Now, on a question about the details of what you're using in the technology here, is the heart rate sensor that you're using and the breath sensor that you're using primarily for the audio and the video output, or is there a data points that you're gathering in there for research to see what is happening when people start to entrain?
From the data we were gathering, we don't actually in that context and how it's been run in the past, we don't actually have the ability to really do that research, because to do that, we would need an additional data point. And that would be some measure of when people are actually entrained, which means we would either need to ask them periodically and say, hey, psst, are you guys entrained right now? Or what we've done with some different research that I've been involved in is where they have little buttons, little keypads. And let's say they hear a little chime every few minutes randomly. And then they would, on that keypad, they would enter a number from 1 to 5, private in secret, based on how close they felt to the other person. So then if we had that, plus this data, then we could go and really do this analysis, and we could say, when both people reported that they were a 5, like the most connected, we also noticed that their heart rate variability or, their breathing or whatever it might be, it totally syncs up in this particular way. And we actually have done some of that research, some pilot studies, looking at what that looks like in the brain and what that looks like in different aspects of the heart and respiration. And that's a really, really interesting area of research that folks are doing at a much more sophisticated level than I'm doing it. It's an area of research called hyperscanning, and sometimes also called social neuroscience. Social neuroscience. And so it's a really, really interesting area of exploration.
Would you be able to talk at all about what we would find in the brain and the heart and the breathing in those contexts? Is that outside of your realm? I'm just curious if you do have insight into it.
Yeah. So I'm not a neuroscientist, but I'm really interested in this area of research, and it's something that actually you had talked to Shamini Jain in um, one of your past conversations, and she's someone with whom I'm partnering with right now to really push this research along. And believe it or not, this is not a very well researched area. Have not been very many people that have actually hooked up sensors to multiple people at the same time, and then explored how the brain and the physiology correlate to these deeper states of human connection. It's been done a little, but it's actually been done very little. And so you have some folks, for example, like HeartMath, who have done that outside of academia, and they have found things, for example, around heart rate coherence, where the change in heart rate over time, which you could think of as something like a wave. Your heart rate goes up, your heart rate goes down. It's often correlated with your breathing. That when people are in a close connected state, that curve becomes linked up like two waves that are cresting and crashing at the same time. And there's also some evidence to suggest that similar things happen in the brain, where you could, for example, look at a particular frequency, let's say in the alpha range for two people, and when they're in a certain state of connection with each other, that their brain waves actually become synchronized. And so there's actually some interesting research that shows that between students and teachers, when the student is more engaged with the teacher, the brain waves of the student are more synchronized with those of the teacher. And so there's some interesting research there.
That's exciting. Yeah, I can see why you're into this.
Yeah. And I guess I'll throw just one quick kind of icing on top is so my general kind of feeling about this stuff, it's kind of my personal hypothesis you could suggest, is that we are rhythmic. We exist, you could say, in this 3D world. We exist as a complex of rhythms. Everything about us is our rhythms. And when we are in total chaos, you could, maybe that's what illness looks like, and when we're in deep harmony, that's what these profound states of awakening look like. But it makes sense that when things are rhythmically entrained, they're working better together. And I think the same would be true between people. And I really believe that as we get deeper into studying this, when two people are, and we have slang terms around this, when two people are in sync, right? When they're on the same wavelength, right? That you would actually be able to measure that as rhythmic processes in the body, in the heart, in the brain, in the breath, and beyond, becoming harmonious with each other. And that's kind of the hypothesis that I'm working off of.
I love it. Yeah, it sounds very much like what is defined as coherence in the brain. If you look at QEEGs or even coherence in the heart, this sort of compounding of waveforms that increases in amplitude as a result of them being in phase.
Yep, it's coherence is a measure of exactly what I'm talking about.
Yeah. Great.
Exactly.
So you seem to have done a lot in this sort of group sync technology arena. In fact, you gave a presentation at IONS about this. Is there more? Is there more here that you're up to in this world?
Well, I guess the big project I'm working on right now, all of this is culminating in a platform that can support 24 people at the same time. And this is in active development. We actually are in our second round of development right now. And it's a pretty freaking cool platform. I'm actually really excited about it at the moment. I'm actually in the other room over here. I've got one of the developers who's hacking away on some code. We've probably got 6 or 7 people that are working on the project in different capacities. And really what it is a platform for research and experimentation around technology and human connection. And the way that it's set up is we have 24 different sensors that can be hooked up to 24 different people, and those can measure breath, they can measure heart, they can measure the brain, they can measure galvanic skin response, which is a measure of emotional arousal. They can measure quite a few different things. And then we can take all of that information from all those people in real time, and then we can analyze it using a computer to look kind of rhythmically at how all these signals relate to each other. And then we can feed that back as sound and light and vibration to the entire group of 24 people. And so each person has their own individual kind of LED display that can be very unique to them. And each person has their own headphones, so they can have their own personalized sound feedback. And each person has their own sort of vibration, like I was describing with the other project around the heartbeats. But we also have kind of the global room light that we can change, and the global sound system for the whole room that we can change. And so within this platform, there's 1,000 different possibilities. So for example, I ran this demo a couple days ago with a group of people, and some of the things we explored were, everyone with headphones on and their personal light in their lap, listening to their own heartbeat and seeing their own heartbeat, and just being able to meditate and feel the heartbeat in their body and have their heartbeat reflected back to them in real time. And then we're able to switch and transition, and now we can go around the circle person by person. And let's say we want to actually practice loving kindness meditation, right? And so we're going to now hear and see each person's heartbeat. So let's say it's your turn. Now the whole room is going to be lit up with your heartbeat, and every single person is going to be able to hear your heartbeat. And now we're going to practice a loving kindness meditation on you for 3 minutes as we feel and hear and see your heartbeat. And then we're going to switch, and we're going to go person by person, and then we can actually have a person who is going to be hooked up to a breath sensor. And so then that person can actually be leading the group in a breath meditation where the entire group is actually seeing and hearing that person's breath, and they can breathe with that person. And then everyone can use their own breath sensors. And then we can actually bring the entire group into rhythmic alignment where the entire group is hearing like an ocean wave as a reflection with their breathing. And when the entire group begins to breathe together, then the entire room begins to sort of crest and crash with this sort of huge ocean wave sound, or we could break up into groups of 4 or break up into groups of 5 and do individual groups. And, so there's sort of endless combination of things we can do. And in November 17th, we're running one of the first technology augmented meditation retreats that I know of at Esalen, which is pretty fun. And the retreat is going to be led by a friend, an amazing meditation teacher, Dustin DePerna. And so this is really going to be a human-machine hybrid where this really skilled meditation teacher is going to be using the technology as a tool to support his meditation instruction. And so that's what we're working up to right now.
Wow. So this is a fairly big installation. Where's it going to be? Is this available to the public to go in and access, or is this in a research lab somewhere where you have to have a white coat in order to sit into the chamber?
It's some neither of those. It's on some other axis. So we have a consciousness hacking intentional community where I live. It's a 10-person, 6,000 square foot house, and the entire downstairs is becoming a research lab, which is in part supported and funded by one of our housemates who is extremely passionate about this space and has a neuroscience background. And we're developing a number of technologies in the lab, and we're actually hiring 2 or 3 researchers right now to begin full-time work in the lab. And so we're actually living we're living in the lab, and maybe it would be fun if we started wearing lab coats around. That could be that could be interesting. But so we do have public demonstrations and demos for the project where we bring people in and we let them try it as part of our development process. And for those people that want to try that, totally welcome to contact me, and I guess we can talk about that at the end. Best points for contact.
Yeah. Well, definitely. I want to get on that if that's at all possible. Wow,
Oh, yeah.
that sounds amazing. And at what point? How much longer before you think that this is fully built out and ready to go?
Depends on what you mean by that. Anywhere from like 20 years to to 6 weeks. We've got this demo in November. I mean, I ran a version of it 3 days ago. So we're sort of just in constant development. And we've got this demo in November, and that's kind of our hard deadline. But for us, that's really just still the beginning. That's still just figuring out what this is and what it wants to be. Because, I mean, if you kind of take a step back and you think about what we're working on here, what we're talking about is something so profoundly fundamental and important to our human existence. What we're really talking about is how do you support deep and meaningful and even transpersonal sort of human connection, a unitive sense between humans, a sense where the boundaries between us begin to dissolve. How do you make that more accessible? Mm-hmm. And if you can make it accessible as a cell phone, that deep sense of connection between people, my sense is you could begin to radically change the cultural landscape of our planet. So that's really what we're working on. I want to see this technology available to 1 billion people, not in its current form where you've got to put on a bunch of sensors and strap in, but the evolution of this technology, and what that would look like, I don't know. But the most important thing is how it feels. And how it feels is that it's really making accessible our already innate capacity for profound connection with humanity.
Let's shift gears a little bit. You founded an organization called Consciousness Hacking, and some people may not know what that is. Can you just introduce us to that and tell us how people might be able to get involved?
For sure. Consciousness hacking is my kind of meta approach to all of this. So recognizing that I could build a few technologies here and there, but what I really wanted was community. A group of people that had a similar vision, that were aligned, that could be working on all different aspects of this and be really having this conversation, this deep exploration of what it means to develop new tools to support well-being and awakening. And so this started off in San Francisco as a group of people just getting together and asking these questions. And pretty soon we had a group in New York, and we had a group in Santa Barbara, and now there's about 30 communities around the world. And it really is a community organization focused on exploring this area, and it's extremely multidisciplinary. We have people that are neuroscientists, that are entrepreneurs, that are spiritual teachers, psychotherapists, the whole gamut. And if there's a community in your area, I encourage you to join. And if there's not one in your area, we love it when people start them up.
The other thing I wanted to get to was talking about the Transformative Technology Conference that you co-founded, which is right around the corner.
Yeah, it is around the corner. I am really excited about this conference. Jeffrey and Nicole, who co-founded Jeffrey Martin and Nicole Bradford, who co-founded the conference with me, and who now are running it. I'm no longer running the conference. They have continued to sort of push this forward, and the exciting thing about it is it really is the only real nexus point for the tech industry meeting wellness and the elevation of consciousness from a deep perspective, and happening in a kind of a non-woo-woo, very grounded, very down to earth, very practical kind of perspective. And there's an exhibition with a bunch of the latest technologies. There's incredible speakers. It's really a really special gathering point, and for me, it's one of the most important events that happens in the year.
So folks can go check out ttconf.org. It's October 13th through and 14th this year. So it really is just a couple weeks away. What is interesting to you outside of your work? What kind of technology is coming out now that you find really cool? Maybe stuff that's even going to be at this conference.
Yeah. There's some different interesting stuff. Actually, I guess knowing, your audience, I can kind of gear things in that direction. One of the things that I'm really intrigued by is this possibility for interfaces to, at the surface level, what I would call embodied intelligence. But I actually believe it goes much deeper than that. Interfaces to what you might call source intelligence or intuition or intelligence beyond the self, and this has long been something that mystics and intuitives have had access to. But if we can actually build a digital interface, a technological interface to that intelligence, I actually think that will be one of the stepping stones for bridging science and spirit, for bringing our sort of technological revolution in line and in harmony with life's natural rhythms. And so I'll give you an example of one of the ways that I see this happening. There's a project that I'm advising called Sensie, Sensie. And I imagine you and most of your listeners have heard of muscle testing.
Yeah.
And this is a really interesting and also, debated approach to kind of tapping into the body's intelligence by sort of asking kind of often yes or no questions and then testing kind of the muscular response. But it requires a person on the other end to sort of do that testing, just to sense how kind of firm the muscles are. And that's very fallible because people have biases and they have their own perspective, their own opinions. Now, what Sensie has done is they've put this, they've created an app where your phone can actually take the place of the muscle tester. And the way it works is you take the phone in your hand, you ask a yes or no question, and then you flick the phone almost like a wrist flick, and the accelerometers in the phone that are testing the movement can actually look for micro muscle movements that change depending on if the answer is yes or the answer is no, or positive or negative. And so what they're essentially doing is doing that same muscle testing, but using the phone for the muscle testing. And to start, the applications are simple. It's like helping people detect their emotions. It's helping people sort of detect which foods might be good for them or not good for them. But for me, once you begin to make that, you hone that in and you begin to increase the accuracy of it. My optimistic, my kind of hopeful sense, the part of me that kind of believes really broadly and really deeply in things way beyond our normal understanding, kind of hopes that can be a sort of a portal, that when we get really good at that when we ask those questions, that the way that the answers come through and the type of information that we can be sensing can be something really deep and really profound. And you also see this kind of happening where you have random number generator based technologies or random event generator technologies where, for example, IONS, the Institute of Noetic Sciences, ran an experiment at Burning Man where they put a bunch of these random number generators around the festival. And at these peak moments, particularly when the man burns, which is kind of the central kind of peak experience of the event, you see these extremely non-random events happening in these random event generators that are all correlated to each other. And so there's some way in which this technology, which is just producing random numbers, is somehow connected to consciousness, right? And again, it's another example of this technological bridge to consciousness. And so that's one of the areas that I'm particularly intrigued by.
Wow. Well, I'm so glad that you brought up this app and muscle testing, because it's been something that I have been learning recently and trying to really define what the heck is going on and how accurate it is. And you're right. There's a lot of bias, and it makes me think, since there are so many, for people who are not aware of this, you have to ask binary questions like yes or no or true or false, and you push down on a whatever muscle, and if the muscle response is strong, then it equates to a true or a yes answer, and the opposite is also the case. So, but it makes me think we're sharing and overlapping our biofields. There's a shared consciousness that's inherent to this process. And so if the tester has any bias at all in their thought of what they think the answer might be, it's sort of like the whole quantum collapsing of the electron into reality. You know what I'm saying? Like, you have an influence on the person's response to a certain degree.
Absolutely. I would imagine a huge influence, not just because of the way you're at the physical level, because of the way you're feeling the muscle, but as you said, probably in much more subtle ways that you would be influencing them as well.
Are there other ways that you're aware of that you may be able to quantify whether these muscle responses are accurate? Something like galvanic skin response or other types of technology?
Yeah, it depends on sort of what you're trying to test for. So for example, let's say you wanted to use this as a tool to diagnose disease, right? Then that would be an easy kind of ground truth, because you could take 100 people that have a known set of diseases that have already been diagnosed, and then you run them through this test, and you can see how accurate the thing is in determining if they actually have those diseases. Or if you were interested in whether or not they were telling the truth, then you might use more like a lie detector type technology to test that. Or if you were interested in food allergies, right? So it depends on what you're trying to test. The way that they've been doing the research so far is they essentially just ask people questions where they know the answer to them. Are you a male? Are you a female? Is your favorite color blue? Just basic questions. And so then the system can evaluate whether or not they gave the answer correct or false, but then the person can actually say, yes, that was true, or yes, that was false. So that's sort of the starting point.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to ask about your TEDx talk, which I watched right before we spoke, and I love some of the points that you're making. And you started off with describing meditation as developing out of a certain culture and certain era, and being appropriate, almost being appropriate for a certain time other than now to a certain extent, and that there may be a way to upgrade that in some way. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, totally. I think it's one of the lenses on all this that makes a lot of sense to me. We are benefiting greatly from these techniques and approaches that in some cases have been developed 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. And I am in deep gratitude and admiration of the of these yogis that have actually iterated on and created these techniques. But I also don't view them as these sort of frozen in time, static things that have to be sort of honored exactly as they are. My sense is that the Buddha, for example, used every means necessary that he could to support human awakening. I don't think he gave a crap about what the technique was, as long as it worked, right? And I think that if the Buddha was alive today, he would be using this day and age every technique that was available to him. And so from my view, this is an iterative evolutionary process where we need to continue to develop new and better and more appropriate approaches to, let's say, to meditation, to expanding consciousness, that are appropriate to our modern context. And so what we're mostly trying to do is kind of fit the square peg into the round hole. So we're sort of saying, okay, well, mindfulness works in these contexts. Let's try to make mindfulness fit into this modern context. So we shorten it to 3 minutes, and we, put it into an app, and we package it as an 8-week mindfulness-based stress reduction course. And we do everything we can to kind of shoehorn it into modern culture. And don't get me wrong, that's great. That actually overall is net positive, right? It's just not necessarily very efficient. And there may be other more efficient ways of doing this. For example, if you can completely rethink meditation and say, what's the fundamental goals of meditation? And what would that look like inside of virtual reality, right? Or what would that look like in an app or a wearable or something like that? And that's where I think we really need to be thinking. And honestly, some of the most open-minded and insightful and deepest meditation teachers that I know completely agree. There's no attachment to meditation being a particular form. I mean, that's the whole point of meditation. And these contemplative traditions is to not be attached. There's even an expression, if you see the Buddha on the path, kill him, right? It's this sense, don't get overly attached to the way in which this happens. It's not the way in which it happens that matters. It's the resulting human experience that matters.
This is really, really interesting to me as I start to explore the neuroscience behind meditation and what most people are directed this day and age. If they're directed to meditation or they find themselves gravitating towards meditation, it seems to be simply as a relaxation technique because they're stressed. And this is a kind of a new phenomenon. It's not like 1,000 years ago, people who were doing this were like, I'm stressed out with my farming lifestyle. I need to do some meditation. It was an entirely different pursuit in a way. It was a pursuit back to the singularity. It was to feel a sense of enlargement or a unified connection to the field, or however you want to put it. And so I'm bringing this up right now because what's come to me is that different types of meditation end up having a different effect on the brain. And that may not be the intended effect that the person that initially is pursuing it wants. And secondly, a lot of people that are meditating who have been brain scanned are there is no actual change in their brain map before and after.
So yeah, I mean, I see what you're saying. You're saying because people are sort of using meditation as sort of a superficial kind of technique, that when it's actually investigated, what's actually exposed is that there actually really isn't any change happening, that what they're calling meditation isn't even really having any significant impact on their neurology.
Yes, and I'm also saying, in addition to that, I'm saying it's hard to know if you're having a change if you never get a baseline or a reference point, a calibration to what one considers normal.
Totally. So this has been the role for centuries of the meditation teacher, right? Where they would basically be playing the role of the QEEG or the, whatever, because they would be detecting the person's level of progress in meditation through other means, through conversation and probably by sensing their field and that sort of thing. And we're in a new age, where all of a sudden we can begin to detect these things using technology. We can begin to quantify these different states of meditation. And we are even seeing products emerging on the market, like, for example, the Muse headband, which is a device you can buy at big name electronic stores, where it actually is measuring your state of meditation in real time and then connecting to your phone. And then through headphones, you can actually hear real-time feedback of your state of meditation and have a whole tool to essentially guide you and teach you how to meditate by actually reading your brain. And so these are some really interesting things that are emerging in the marketplace. But to your point, to the other aspect of your point, meditation to a large extent was invented for one reason and one reason alone, to attain enlightenment. Right? That's it. It's a tool to attain enlightenment. And this whole idea, as you said, of relaxing and reducing stress, and we're basically trying to package mindfulness as a pharmaceutical, as a pill that we can kind of use to cure all of these diseases, anxiety, depression, insomnia, whatever it might be. And from my sense, the only reason why that even works, the only reason why it does work for all these conditions, is not because it just so happens to like a chemical, it just so happens to hit those receptors. It's because most of what we struggle with as a human species in this modern age has the same fundamental roots. We essentially live in conflict and in delusion. We exist in a perpetual state of conflict with ourselves and reality. Another way of saying this, we're not present. We're not actually in love and fully embracing what is right now. And so as soon as that's not our natural, that which is our natural state. And so the moment we're out of that natural state, our system is in a state of dysfunction, is in a state of disharmony. And collectively, we just live in that perpetual state of dysfunction. And so that results in all kinds of diseases, and we can't sleep, and we're anxious, and we're depressed, and our mind won't stop chattering and talking to us, but it's the same root thing. And so from my vantage point, the single biggest scientific area of research, this sort of the most important area of research that I can imagine for humanity at this time, is the scientific study of enlightenment, not the scientific study of meditation. That's already begun. That's been happening for decades. But if you look and you investigate, what you realize is that it's been taboo for all this time to talk about the whole reason why meditation exists, because it's considered religious. There's not really a way that it fits into a kind of a modern scientific paradigm, but that's just beginning to change. You're starting to see these contemplative neuroscientists that are studying meditation that are behind the scenes beginning to clearly acknowledge, because most of them are meditators, they're beginning to clearly acknowledge that, look, the whole point of this is enlightenment. And as soon as we can start talking about it from a scientific perspective, from a quantified perspective, from a neuroscience perspective, that's when we can begin furthering the science of it and then developing new technologies and new interventions to bring that into the world. And from my viewpoint, if we don't wake up as a humanity, we're potentially kind of screwed, because we're really killing ourselves. Almost every single problem we face as a species is something that we've created. Now, of course, we have hurricanes and we have these natural disasters, which arguably are even partially caused by changes in the environment, which we're also creating. But beyond that, the wars, the famines, the genocides, the lack of distribution of resources, pollution, all of these things, these are human generated, and I don't believe they're just sort of happening by happenstance. I really believe that internal conflict generates external conflict, and we can change the world from the inside out, and we need to change the world from the inside out. So my whole vision, if I were to sort of state my life's mission statement, is to create universally accessible tools to support transformation and awakening. And when I look around and I say, well, what's universally accessible? Well, it's not language, it's not food, it's not music, it's not, almost no aspect of culture transfers from one part of the world to another. But over 90% of the planet has an active cell phone account. So technology is very unique in that respect. So if we can create tools that support awakening and enlightenment that are as accessible as cell phones, then I think we can see real change happen in the world.
I love that. And I love your point about the scientific study of enlightenment, because there's generally speaking, there's this study of pathology. People are looking at what's wrong with other people. This has sort of been the basis for studying something, right? Rather than a pursuit of the human potential, and how do we map that, and how do we basically hack that, which is what you're saying.
Yep, you got it.
Wow. Well, thank you, Mikey. Let us know all the different ways that people can learn about you.
Yeah, so consciousness hacking website is cohack.life, COHACK.life. And you can find me on Twitter. It's at Mikey Siegel. And those are probably, I'm trying to think, are there other ways? Those are probably yeah, the two best ways.
Awesome. Well, thank you, and good luck with your endeavors.
Thank you so much, Jonathan.